Hello and welcome to GD Politics. I'm Galen Druk. Make yourself at home, stay a while. I wanted to give folks a little bit of an update on what we're doing here on gdpolitics.com as we kick off the first week post 538. So, first of all, I hope to launch a podcast here. Now, this is itself a Substack, but I'm thinking by next week, hopefully Monday, March 17th, which is also St. Patrick's Day, we'll have a podcast feed up and running so that you can subscribe wherever you listen to your podcasts and continue listening there. But I'm also hoping that you will subscribe to gdpolitics.com because this is going to be where you'll be able to find everything, updates, paid features when we have them, and really build a community. And so I hope you will be part of the community that supports GD Politics. I know many of you have already pledged money. That's very, very generous. I know that there's not actually a feature to become a paid subscriber yet, but I'm also working on rolling that out in the coming days. And I'm hoping you'll consider doing that when the time is right. So we are going to launch a GD Politics podcast, and we're also going to have this Substack right here. So those are some of the logistics, but what is GD Politics? Well, first and foremost, it's a double entendre, which gets at the person who will be taking you on this journey to better understand the world and politics, which is yours truly. Secondly, it gets at, I think, how a lot of people feel about politics these days, which is god dang politics. You know, it can be frustrating. There are three sort of guiding principles or ideas I hope to bring to GD Politics, which is first and foremost curiosity, starting with questions, not answers, being open-minded. The second is rigor. That can mean data and evidence. It can mean other things as well. And the third is a sense of humor, because I'm not going to be able to do this without it. And I don't think you'll enjoy it if we don't have a bit of a sense of humor as well. I'm hoping to talk to journalists, writers, politicians, people with compelling ideas about the world. And yes, some of my former colleagues, in fact, before we hit record just now, I was on the phone with my former colleague, Nathaniel Rakich. He called me at 11:30 because that's the time that we usually record the podcast on Mondays. So that was very sweet of Nathaniel. It was nice to hear from you. And, you know, to the point of having fun, I've been playing with some ideas over the weekend and the days since. Like, one idea is I'd like to do a Veep rewatch, maybe have a different guest on for each episode. So Mike Pence, Kamala Harris, or if you work for either of those people and you are watching this, get in touch. I would love to watch an episode of Veep with you and talk about it. Anyway, I am very excited about everything that's to come, but that is in the future. So what are we doing today? Well, you may be asking, why is there a plate of bagels with lox and cream cheese behind me? Why is there a mirror that is covered by a t-shirt? Why is your otherwise usually well-coiffed friend Galen both not shaven and wearing a shirt that is ripped in multiple places? Well, Gentiles, welcome to Shiva. I mentioned that we hope to launch a podcast feed for GD Politics in a week, next Monday, March 17th. And that means that we have 7 days between now and then. One, because there's some logistics to figure out, but also two, because in Judaism, typically there is a 7-day mourning period that follows a burial during which we remember what we lost. And so I was raised both Jewish and Catholic, and we're going to sit Shiva for 7 days. And at the end of those 7 days, they will end on St. Patrick's Day when we will launch a podcast. So there you have it. And how are we going to observe Shiva here at GD Politics? I have heard from literally hundreds of you, many hundreds of you over the past several days, and I want to read some of those comments. Now, I don't just want to sit here and read like lots of compliments that you have given me. Some of them are very complimentary, but I chose some comments that got at something a little bit deeper about what we had and maybe what we can build again, what I hope to build again. Also, later this week, as part of this morning period, I am going to dig back through some of the photo archives from over the past 9 years. This weekend, I was looking through my photo roll on my phone, going back to 2015, and I found some really fun pictures that I'll share with you all. Think, karaoke with Nate Silver, a cattle ranch with Claire Malone, the time that I got a spray tan that was 2 shades too dark before going to the Republican National Convention. I think it'll be a fun time. Most of these things are probably things that you haven't seen of or heard before, even if you have been listening to the 538 Politics podcast for a long time. Okay, so let's get into it. And I am going to begin with a couple more earnest comments. There's a lot of fun stuff that we're going to get to. But first, I just wanted to shout out people who said that the podcast had impacted their lives in a real way or impacted the world around them in some way. And that was principally from teachers. So first and foremost, a big shout out to my teachers who use the podcast and use 538 articles in the work that they did and maybe even inspire them a little bit. So here's an example. Samantha writes, I'm a political science professor of American politics at a small liberal arts college in Western Massachusetts. More than half of our students are Pell eligible, and it's always been a goal as a faculty member to provide students with free, good sources. Your podcasts were, and I'm sure will continue to be, a very large part of this. I still remember teaching campaign and elections in 2022 and saying in class that I hope they all enjoy 538 because the class is half brought to them by you all. A handful of students in the class clapped, and by the end, most students were listening to the pod weekly. Awesome, Samantha. You gotta evangelize 538. Julia also said, I'm a math teacher and current master's student studying statistics. Back when I taught statistics for 12th graders, I often assigned 538 articles in class. I used to tell the kids that working for a place like 538 was a dream of mine. Last year, I did in fact leave my teaching career behind for grad school, and I guess the data-driven journalism you so eloquently delivered on a weekly basis inspired me, at least in part. That's super nice. We heard from a lot of people who said that listening to the 538 Politics podcast had encouraged them to go to grad school, use data and statistics in different ways. It inspired them to become interested in politics. We heard from writers and journalists who said that it shaped how they wrote, the kind of journalism that they did. One example was from Elmer, who wrote, Good luck on new ventures, Galen. The podcast really pushed me to be more into politics, and I'm now studying it at university, always keeping data in mind. Keep being an optimist. Thanks, Elmer. And speaking of optimism, that gets to another theme that we heard from folks, which was that they noticed some of the cheer or spark that I brought to the work that I did. And yeah, politics can be heavy stuff and data can be dry stuff. And so I think it sort of, the job calls for it. Otherwise it was, the sugar that helped the data medicine go down, if you will. But also I am an optimist and I do want to enjoy the work that I do and have fun doing it with people that I enjoy being around. And so thank you for noticing. For example, Caleb said, Thank you all. Thanks for all your cheer, energy, and insight for the last decade, Galen. Sad for this moment, but excited to see your next chapter. Harrison said, I've been listening since high school, and as a fellow gay data nerd with a sense of humor, you and your colleagues have helped to bring a sense of both clarity and levity to some pretty rough times. I can't thank you enough for that. JD goes on to write, really going to miss the podcast. I hope something similar can take its place. It was probably the only politics podcast I felt I actually learned something without being furious. LOL. JD Vance, I didn't realize you were a listener, but I'm glad we could keep you grounded all these years. There's no need to be furious. Sean says, your skill at making complicated data accessible and even fun week after week has enriched my life for years. It helped me stay tuned with American politics without the animosity that accompanies a lot of the discourse. We heard from other folks who said that this was the only politics podcast they could listen to because things had gotten so, negative or partisan or whatever it may be. And so that meant a lot to me. And I think something that I knew, but was also clear from reading all of the responses over the past several days, is that you all mirrored that sense of humor back to me. I think a lot of you guys are pretty funny, pretty nerdy folks. And so here's some of what I heard from you all. Alex sent a picture, a GIF of what appeared to be a strung out Fivey Fox and said, "Look what they did to Fivey. He sells crack in Bushwick now." Rowan said, "I'm sorry for skipping the ads and never starting a business with Shopify or signing up for BetterHelp." Daniel says, similarly, "When you land on your feet, I will push subscribe and buy a mattress or probiotics or nearly any product from the company which places the first ad buy." Do you hear that, ad buyers? Daniel's out there ready to buy your product. I don't know if we're going to have ads or not. I don't know. I think it depends on how many subscribers we get. Okay. Gregors says, "The politics pod belongs in the heaven meme with Harambe and Steve Irwin. Just an absolute load-bearing pillar of my early adulthood. Very sad to see it go, and thank you for your work." Can we work on getting that into the meme as a personal fan aficionado of Harambe and Steve Irwin? That would mean a lot. Matt says, "Bad use of layoffs." Love that, Matt. Jeffrey says, "You guys were the nerdiest podcast in the world." Will says, "Thanks, Galen," in quotation marks. I can only assume that this is a commentary on the way that we ended the podcast each episode, which is that I would say thank you to the guest and then pause, and they would say thank you back to me. I don't know how that started or if that's weird, but, politeness and civility is nice. And so I hope you enjoyed it. Thanks, Will. Women for Bernie wrote, "Hello and in quotation marks, hello and welcome to the 538 podcast. I'm Galen Druk." That quote, in quotation marks, lives in my head rent-free. I'm going to miss you. Oh, Women for Bernie. You don't have to miss us, though. You can follow along on GD Politics. Colin says, "I'm going to miss your voice every week, which my girlfriend likes to do a bad impression of when she hears you come on." Colin, please send me this bad impression of your girlfriend imitating me. I think I would personally enjoy that. Matt says, "Hang in there, buddy. We are here with you and for you. The best is yet to come," which I expect is sort of helping promote my sense of optimism for the future, but also a reference to Kimberly Guilfoyle at the 2020 Republican National Convention, which was truly one of the most iconic moments of that entire election. And then we heard from L Hop, who said, "You created lies and fake polls. This is a good..." Oh, wait. Sorry. That's actually not a supportive message that we heard. L Hop saying that this is a good day, which brings us to another theme, which is that we heard from a lot of Republicans who thought that they were the only Republicans listening to the podcast. But it turns out that there were a lot of you because you all let me know that you were actually out there listening. I don't know what people's perceptions of my own partisanship is. I am registered as an independent for whatever that's worth. I mean, I also came up in journalism in an era where that was the norm. You registered as an independent because you weren't supposed to be part of one party or another or rooting for one or the other. And for me, like I said, curiosity and rigor guide the work that I do and how I try to understand the world more than anything else, be it ideology, dogma, whatever. So Republicans, I'm glad you were listening, and you were absolutely not alone. Weirdly, we didn't hear from any Democrats who thought that they were the only ones listening. I don't know. But so, for example, Penn says, "I'm a Trump voter, but I loved your work and the 538 pod. Listened all the time and had notifications on Spotify. Hope to see you back on Spotify with a new podcast soon." Ken says, "Sure, they're New York lefties, but overall 538 was good reporting and conversation when too many politics pods are carnival barkers of some variety. Major loss." We also heard from a self-described avid conservative / Tea Party Q kind of guy who wished us well. He also did mention getting jobs at the DMV, so I don't know if he was being serious about wishing us well or being more sarcastic. We also heard from Sam, who said, "Hi, Galen. Sorry to hear about 538 closing. The outlet was a major influence on me when I started my polling career. I relied on the poll tracking, redistricting pages, and voting stats, and the podcast often gave me a fresh perspective. I'm now a Republican pollster and have been using 538 for all sorts of needs." There were also people who simply said that their politics didn't align with the politics they heard on the podcast. So again, I should say, we tried to strip out a lot of the partisanship that motivates a lot of the conversations. I know that people can get that elsewhere. And so I wasn't hoping that people who listened, saw their politics reflected back to them. We heard from someone who calls themselves totally not a Russian agent. "This sucks, man. While I don't align with the politics of the 538 crew, it was still one of my go-to pods, and you and the team will be sorely missed. Best of luck in your future endeavors." Thank you, not a Russian agent. Amdalin said, "Unlike a lot of political coverage, you made me feel engaged and educated without feeling like I was being fed straight spin. Not to say 538 never had spin." That was Amdalin's words. I am sorry for all the times that 538 had spin. Connor says, "At baseline, I can be a bit of a salty, curmudgeonly, disagreeable sort of guy. So it's not like I always agreed with y'all. But gosh darn it, if I didn't deeply enjoy listening and learning about polling and hearing the headlines and political goings on, and even disagreeing with the hosts and guests and developing my own views on the subjects y'all discussed." That's awesome, Connor. I hope you develop your own views and don't just adopt the ones that you hear from people in the media, like me or like anyone else. But speaking of curmudgeonly, I want to take a moment to shout out somebody who had a somewhat consistent presence on my own Twitter notifications over the past several years. And this was somebody who goes by the name of Anti-Woke Podcast. And this starts the section of comments, which was advice. So Anti-Woke Podcast advice was, "Start your Substack, start your next podcast, do it now. I'm already forgetting about you." Well, Anti-Woke Podcast, I'm taking your advice. See, we're here. Don't forget about me. But also, Anti-Woke Podcast is an account that would comment on posts over the years when they felt like our podcast was getting too woke, or there was an episode that they thought was too woke. I'm saying they. I think this is probably a he. No judgment. But, there are times when men and women do behave differently. I would say, like, for example, when somebody tells me they saw somebody masturbating on the subway, I don't ask them, was it a guy? I kind of just assume. So I kind of just assume that Anti-Woke Podcast is a guy. And so for all the times you felt we were too woke, I'm sorry. But also, there were plenty of people who throughout the years said that we were, giving space to right-wing talking points and whatnot. Anyway, you know what my mission was at this point, and I hope you will listen to whatever comes next and not forget about us. Okay, but on a more serious note, we did get a lot of advice from folks, which was really, really nice. So to kick this off, Mike says, "I always enjoyed the 538 podcast. You and your colleagues will be fine. It might actually be a good thing to be on your own." Mike, I like that sentiment, and that was kind of a theme here. So Mendel says, "You have a unique opportunity to define your output on your own terms and know that people will follow you because of who you are, not what you're doing. So do and talk about what you love. So long as you're you'll be successful." That's an awesome note, Mendel. I hope that's the case. We're going to find out. But in that spirit, a lot of what we did, I really liked. I want to have even more fun, have maybe even more of a sense of humor going forward. I also, while this is, I think, going to be broadly a politics podcast, politics also sucks. And so sometimes you just have to talk about something else. And I think we'll find places to pepper in some excursions away from politics here and there, or maybe even politics that aren't American. So I will potentially have more freedom to go different places, travel around a little bit. Maybe I'll find myself in Ontario for the Canadian federal election. I don't know, that's probably too soon. But, we got freedom now. So, moving on. Bob also had some really nice advice when it comes to knowing ourselves in the organizations we like to work in. So Bob says, when we look at opportunities, we think about the role or job, what we can do, and what we want or love to do, where, with whom, compensation, etc. He says, consider also what kind of organization you do your best work in. All orgs don't track to the same ineluctable development arc. Great word there. But think about whether you work best in a large, well-established, often well-resourced group or in a smaller, more recent, and less well-formed one. There is no one answer which applies to everyone at all points in their life, just a good answer for you, which considers where you can do good work, have impact, and can put and sustain twinkle in your eyes. Don't settle for just a paycheck or a good title. I love that. And Chad says, your hosting of the roundtable at the 538 Politics podcast was great, but I thought you always had some of the most insightful and smart questions in your one-on-one interviews. I particularly remember your first interview with Ann Selzer. You also do a good job of calling out BS answers and question avoidance without being overly confrontational. I also enjoy doing one-on-one interviews, whether they're more semi-confrontational or kind of oppositional, challenging interviews, or just talking with people that I may know in the real world who also do data journalism work. So I do hope to do more of that. Moving on, I heard from some people who said that they had met me in real life over the years, which was really sweet. And I should just say, in general, every time I've met a 538 Politics podcast listener in the street or wherever it may have been, they were always the nicest, kindest people, and I really just loved hearing from you all. And I've met folks in, I don't know, Sweden. I met somebody on a ferry going from Argentina to Uruguay. I met somebody, a listener trying to get into a club in Mexico City. We did actually get into the club. We weren't just trying. I met folks on dates. I ended up on dates with podcast listeners because of Hinge. I also, was approached by podcast listeners during dates, which was kind of nice because it made me look especially cool. Y'all have bought me shots. You've given me, cocktails or whatever it may be. So when I have met you out in the real world, it's been a real joy. So Aiden writes, feeling a little heartbroken that you won't be in my podcast feed for the time being. In the meantime, I'm already an excited subscriber to GD Politics, rock on, and cannot wait to see what you do next. This is the most random thing, but we actually met last fall when I ran into you on the streets of NYC. I was able to thank you in person for all that you do and snap a picture with you. It was such a highlight for me. So again, thank you to everyone who has listened and even approached me. Actually, somebody approached me this weekend to say sorry that 538 was shut down. It was really sweet. And in this sort of vein, we heard from a lot of folks who considered themselves super listeners or super fans or whatever, who told me how many minutes they had listened because of the Spotify features. In the spirit of statistics, Ted said, I won't say that I listen to every single podcast, but I listen to more than 95%, perhaps even 99%. This goes back to 2016. I've probably heard more podcasts hosted by you than all others combined. So I want to say, number one, thank you to everyone who spent so much of their life sharing their life with me, so much time sharing their life with me. That also means that you've heard from a lot of different people over the years. And actually, that also means that when you first started listening, I didn't host the podcast. For a couple years, it was Jody Avergan, and then it switched to me maybe around the end of 2018, beginning of 2019. And so I want to take a moment to shout out all of those people, of course, starting with Jody Avergan, who was the host when it kicked off. I was producing the show back then. So writing up prep docs, the likes, doing what Cameron Chertavian and Shane McKeon were just doing for me before the podcast shut down. But also, of course, I got to shout out Nate Silver, the man and dear friend, another dear friend, Claire Malone, Harry Enton, Perry Bacon Jr., Micah Cohen, Sarah Frostenson, Mary Radcliffe, Lee Askaranam, many people who worked at 538 throughout the years who were regulars on the podcast. There were also some frequent guests who were not employed by 538, like Ruth Egelnick, Carlos Odillo, Tia Mitchell, Rachel Bade. I'm absolutely forgetting many names here. Julia Azari. So please, please, please forgive me. And I also want to say a big thank you to the many producers and interns that we had over the year, most recently Cameron and Shane, and also Tony Chow, who is the king of video production. And then, of course, I have to say a big shout out to my boys who went down on the ship with me, Nathaniel Rakich, Jeffrey Scally, and Elliot Morris. We did it. We wrote it to the end. So thank you. Okay, we're almost wrapping up here. But one note before we do, or get to the final theme, was we got some comments about the final podcast. So Philip said, "It was wild as I learned the news of 538 shutting down while listening to your very good podcast about the not State of the Union address. Sad day and going to miss the articles and podcasts." Alex, who says that he's from Scotland, but not a teen or she. "I'd been listening to 538 podcast since it began. I was shocked and very disappointed to hear the news that it is being shut down. You and Nathaniel showed tremendous professionalism during the post-non-State of the Union show last night." Thank you for saying that. I really appreciate it. Actually, so what happened was Cameron, our producer, was over at my apartment. We were watching the fake State of the Union address. And then I just started getting messages being like, "Did you see the Wall Street Journal article?" Because the news had leaked in the Wall Street Journal the night before all of this was meant to go down. So we all found out on Wednesday. The news reporting came out on Tuesday night. So Cameron and I are left sitting there. We have a podcast planned with Mary and Nathaniel that evening. We're left sitting there being like, what should we do? We could not do a podcast because clearly this thing is ending. We cannot say anything. We can sort of really lean into like, this is our last podcast, and that can be the theme of the podcast. We settled on what we ended up doing, which was kind of like, a soldier going into battle knowing that you're getting shot, right? Like, we just wanted to do the podcast the way that we've been doing it for so many years, acknowledging it, but moving on and just sort of taking whatever would come in the morning. And I know that there are people out there who are annoyed, who want to, hear more frustration from us about how everything went down. And I'm sure over time, you will hear lots of people talk about it. But for me, it was important to go out on a positive note because it was a positive experience overall for those 9 years. And so I hope you appreciated that. And speaking of going out on a positive note, I want to end on one of my favorite comments of all of the comments that I heard. This is a little bit of a long one, so bear with me here, but it gets at something really important. So Aaron wrote in and said, "I've been listening to you and your illustrious colleagues for several years now, dating back to sometime in the 2020 election cycle. Everything about the podcast scratched an itch of some kind for me, whether it's the raw data and analysis, the queer representation, or even the awful jokes. Seriously, I've lost count of how many times I've had to pause the playback just to let a truly terrible pun settle in my brain for a second. You're all the worst in all the best ways. You must know better than anyone how difficult it is to casually talk politics in 2025, especially with someone who doesn't agree with you. Frankly, I'm terrified about where our discourse is headed in the coming years. But as our societal divisions have deepened, 538 has been a uniquely valuable resource for me in navigating these, dare I say it, unprecedented times. 538 has offered what no other source seems to have at the ready: objective facts. Anyone can spin the data however they want or massage it to fit their own narrative, but you and your team's dedication to bringing the raw numbers to the table and challenging your own perceptions and interpretations have been the most valuable assets to me as I've tried to find my bearings on each new issue as it comes up. One of my greatest fears has always been that I would get sucked into the propaganda like so many of my friends and family on both sides of the aisle have. Your work has been the anchor I've needed, providing me the tools to push back against rhetoric used to attack me, as well as to resist it when it's used to lure me into an echo chamber. The work you've put into the show over the years and your firm commitment to real, measurable truth have earned you my undying thanks. Your trophy is in the mail." Aaron, that's really sweet. And, in addition to being really appreciative of all of the kind words, I too, in case you couldn't notice from some of the coverage we've done on the podcast over the years, I too worry about the division and discord in American politics and life. And that, coupled with, I think, the breakdown of civil society and just fewer opportunities for people to have random interactions with strangers from all different kinds of backgrounds. Increasingly we're all atomized working from home and just have fewer of these interactions with people who aren't like us. I think it makes it harder to feel a sense of community as a country. I think it makes it harder to feel happy. And so that's what I want to do here at GD Politics, which is, build a community where all kinds of politically inclined people find value, that people find information that help inform their own views, and maybe help them be generous with others when they do encounter people in the real world who don't think like them. So, with that, I'm going to leave things there for today. Like I said, we'll be back later in the week with some more memories from the archives. For now, I'm Galen Druk. Our producers are... Oh, wait, never mind. It's just me, but hopefully not for long. I'm Galen Druk. Make sure to subscribe at gdpolitics.com. Much love. See you later.